Hello and welcome to the second webinar in the Improving Restorations Fall 2024 series, a collaboration between University of Minnesota Extension and the Legacy Fund Restoration Evaluation Program. We are covering a range of restoration topics in this series, and today you will learn about restoring oak savannas. I'm Carly Wagner with the Minnesota DNR, also on behalf of the Board of Water and Soil Resources, working on the Legacy Fund Restoration Evaluation Program. We collaborate with project managers and experts to evaluate restorations, identify what's working and ongoing challenges, and share information to improve restorations through outlets such as our annual report and this webinar series. If you're interested in more training in ecological restoration, our partners at U of M Extension offer an ecological restoration certificate program. This is a great resource for continued learning in the restoration field for everyone from early career professionals to seasoned practitioners. During the Zoom webinar today, we ask that you please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions for answering during our Q&A period after both speakers have had a chance to present. Be sure to use this Q&A function to make sure we can see your question and to increase the likelihood we will be able to get to it during the Q&A. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat and we'll try and assist you. After the presentation, please take a moment to fill out the survey. We plan to offer Improving Restorations webinar series as an ongoing spring-fall series, and we would love to hear your feedback and ideas for future installments. These webinars will be recorded and posted on the series website. We hope to have you join us for the next webinars in this series on December 5th on soils and restoration and December 19th on reed canary grass. Now to introduce our speakers for today. The first is Mike Goodnature. He is the Natural Resources Manager for Ramsey County Park System and has been in this position for over a decade. Mike's work focuses on wildlife protection and the enhancement of over 6,000 acres of natural parkland. Mike has coordinated the restoration of hundreds of acres, including woodlands, prairies, and oak savanna. Our second speaker is Matt McClanahan. He's been the Habitat and Wildlife Biologist for the Minnesota Valley Trust since 2020. He designs and implements habitat restoration and enhancement projects for lands acquired by the Trust, as well as on the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge and the Wetland Management District, in partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service staff. He is often in the field leading and training the Trust's Conservation Corps Minnesota, Iowa crew. With that, I will open the floor to Mike, our first speaker for today.
Thank you, Carly. In a moment here, I'll share my screen. All right, thank you. Thanks for tuning in to listen to this project story. Again, I'm Mike Goodnature. I'm the Natural Resources Manager for Ramsey County Parks and Rec Department. Like Carly had mentioned, I've been in this position for over 10 years. Been in the natural resource field for over 20. A large part of my job is to complete wildlife habitat restoration and enhancement throughout the Ramsey County Park System. Today, I'm going to be talking about an oak savanna restoration project within Battle Creek Regional Park. Just a little bit of background on Ramsey County and the county park system. Ramsey County is the smallest, most densely populated county in the state of Minnesota. There it is in red. Despite that, there is numerous parks throughout the county owned by cities. Specifically, the city of St. Paul has its own regional park system that's quite extensive. And Ramsey County Parks and Recreation Department is the largest landowner in the county and owns over 6,000 acres of natural parkland, and we maintain over 7,000. So these consist of wetlands, native prairie, and various woodlands. Some of the lands within the park system were historically oak savanna, especially in the southern portion of the county along the Mississippi River corridor in this region here. So pictured here in the upper left is a historic painting I found with a view overlooking what's Pig's Eye Lake. This is what I believe is looking south to north. And if you're familiar with the area, it is likely the hillside along what is now Highway 61, heading towards downtown St. Paul. Below is a street view of where I predict the approximate location of this painting occurred, or I could be completely wrong, but it is good representation of what was and what is for land cover along this area. As you can see, from the cattle in the picture, grazing had a large part of keeping these lands areas cleared, these oak savanna lands, but up to pre-settlement, it was fires that swept through these landscapes that naturally kept these oak savanna openings more clear. You can see how the Mississippi bottomlands and hillsides were more wide open in the historic painting as opposed to the overgrown with the trees in the current photo. All of this is also depicted in Marshner's map, the map that was derived from the Public Land Survey, from notes at the turn of the century. Ramsey County fell within the oak, woodland, and brushland barrens area. And that can be seen here. So what is the deal with oak savannas anyway? So the Minnesota DNR said it best on their Woodlands web page, spotlighting oak savannas, that oak savannas are have scattered trees above a layer of prairie grasses and forbs. Bur oak is the most common savanna tree, and it's typically as a spreading form that results from growing in an open environment. The savanna is a transitional ecosystem between the tallgrass prairie and woodlands environment. So it's important habitat for wildlife that both inhabit both of those areas. So it's very rare ecosystem. It used to cover a large portion of Minnesota, roughly 10% of the state. Although fire suppression, agriculture, urban growth have reduced that extent of coverage to less than 0.1% of its original acreage, making it a very rare plant community in the region. So given the significance of this habitat type, the acreage that has been lost, and its importance to a diversity of wildlife, we need to all consider actions to restore and preserve any oak savannas. So a little bit about the park in which this project occurred. Oak savannas existed throughout what is now the larger parks in Ramsey County system, specifically Battle Creek Indian Mounds Regional Park, which is highlighted in the gray here. That's the jurisdiction of the city of St. Paul, and in the green here, which falls under the jurisdiction of Ramsey County Parks and Rec. In 2023, the Battle Creek portion that is owned and operated by Ramsey County Parks went through a master plan update. This included information about the natural resources throughout the park. The park was partitioned up into different land cover classifications, and unique features such as remnant prairies and oak savannas were highlighted. This info was used to determine unique and remnant features. The info to determine these unique and remnant features included looking at things like the DNR ecologicals layer, Marshner's map, which I showed you, obviously field visits and historical aerial photos. And one of the sites that rose to the top was this area on the east side of the park. And since less than 1% of oak savanna existed today, this was a priority area. So in addition, there was a lot of restoration occurring around this project site as well, so that made it a prime candidate. So this particular site is on the east side of Battle Creek, where an old farmstead existed up until the early 1980s, when the area became parkland. At the turn of the century, this area was plowed for crops. You can see on the east side of this old 1940s aerial, while the areas to the south and west were too steep to farm and were likely grazed by cattle, preserving the 100-year-old oaks and keeping the brush at bay. Since this time, over the next 50 plus years, volunteers' trees grow up. You can see on this aerial photo from most recent 2020. These included locust, ash, Siberian elm. They took over the area that had otherwise been an open landscape if grazing or natural fires had continued. So here I highlighted and pinpointed the oak trees that are the old growth oak trees scattered throughout. Otherwise, all the trees within this project site were volunteer trees, mostly invasive. So steps were set in place to restore this area along with 16 acres of prairie conversion and 23 acres of oak savanna enhancement on the west side of the park. But for now, I'm just highlighting this particular project for this talk. So the project steps that I went through here included site assessment. You got to walk the site, right? So that included just taking inventory of what was there, getting pictures, mapping the project site boundaries to get that all set. The site at the time was a mess, like I said, large invasives. The understory and herbaceous layer was sparse, if anything existed. There was a lot of bare soil underneath the trees throughout the site. You can see some of the larger oaks here hiding in the pictures, with a lot of the volunteer trees surrounding. So with that, after the assessment, we set goals. The goals, one of the major goals was to remove all the trees minus the oaks. Again, this would in turn open the canopy and understory and allow sunlight to hit the floor and for us to establish a native prairie mix underneath. So given the site size and in the assessment and what existed there, I came up with a cost estimate. Just from using previous project costs, I was able to get on target with what the prairie conversion costs were. The unknown cost at the time was the mass removal of unwanted trees. I did receive a bid from the county tree contractor, and they did give me an estimate for that. What I did not foresee was the large amount of chips and cost of removal of those would ultimately put me over the budget. And I'll get into that a little later. But using the site assessment, goals, and estimated costs and timeline, I applied for grant funding through the Conservation Partners Legacy Grant, CPL, and submitted that and was awarded that funding. Shortly thereafter, the county tree contractor started the tree removal in January 2022. At this time, I started drafting site specifications using the CPL grant plan as a guide. And then sent RFQs out and a request for quote off to the state master contract of native plant community restorations. And M&L Incorporated was hired to complete the prairie conversion work following the tree removal. So a huge part of this also was communication with the public. This park is very, there's a lot of people that visit this park, Battle Creek especially. So notices were sent out to neighbors since this is in an urban area. Signs were posted on site explaining the work to be completed. So I will show you now some of the tree clearing pictures. This started in January 2022. At the time, I had some foot surgery, so I was taking pictures from the vehicle here, but luckily there was a neighbor, Al Singer, who had gotten some photos, so some of these are his. But as you can see, the equipment used for the tree removal included a fellow buncher, some other equipment you can see in this photo. This was actually taken from another project we're doing at Tamarack Nature Center, a massive tree clearing up project to convert to prairie. But a lot of the equipment used here was used at Battle Creek. So there was a bulldozer, the chipper, excavator, the grapple, and things like that. So it was quite an extensive process. Some of the buckthorn was cut laid on site in prior to the tree work coming in, but these brush bundles were taken and chipped as well. Here, this lower right picture, you can see some of the trees being stacked, the oaks being preserved. We also work closely with the tree contractor just to educate them on the goals and inform them how the oaks needed to be protected during this process as well. They also had to put down mats to drive things in and out along the trails. So it was kind of kind of a interesting process to see it all unfold. So here is the chipping effort. We staged this on the east side of the site, and I'll show you that aerial soon here. The excavator came and fed the chipper, and the chips went in, and it created quite the pile. So that's a picture of that. Here you can see this was in June or spring that following year. The chips were laid while I was trying to figure out what to do with them. And funding was found for them to load the chips and take those out on the semi. You can see in the aerial here how much tree coverage was there. And then in the aerial on the right, what was removed. And you can actually see the pile of chips here, which was actually the size of about under a quarter acre. It was pretty large. So moving on. So with the trees cleared, the site was ready to prep. So Minnesota Native Landscapes took over, or M&L, excuse me, took over to prep the site at that time. Prior to prepping the site, the area was sprayed multiple times with a mixture of triclopyr and glyphosate to knock down reoccurring herbaceous weeds that were popping up after the tree removal. Then in November 2022, M&L had a forestry tiller implement they used to till the soil, and what it also did was grind the numerous stumps that were left on site in one passing, and essentially made a seed bed, a nicely prepared seed bed for the drill seeding that was about to occur. So in areas that were too steep, they used a Fecon forestry mower and got that. But for the most part, it was this implement that was used, and they had to run that with a 300 plus horsepower tractor. So it was quite, they needed quite a bit of power to get that through. So once the site was prepped, it was treated, tilled with this tiller implement. The seeding followed in November of 2022. So all areas flat enough to drill seed were. You can see using a Trillium drill seeder. And then it was to prevent erosion, straw was crimped in, and areas were hydromulched as well. The seed mix used was a savanna mixed height. We went back and forth a little bit between M&L deciding what to use. It was spec'd out initially as just a savanna mix, but a little bit of changes were made. But a great mix for part sun, oak savanna, and woodland edge sites. Minnesota Native Land, or M&L, provided the seed for that. So the results so far and ongoing maintenance, which essentially started spring of 2023 and is to present day. So the site had been through 2 growing seasons. It's evolving. There was some oak seedlings popping up. Early maturing grasses and forbs such as side oats, rye, and Rebecca were emerging first and second season. Big and little blue stem along with bottle brush were prevalent in second growing season. Maintenance since 2023 to present included time mowings to keep down weeds and cool season grasses for the most part. Spot spraying was completed. As everyone knows, 2024 started out very wet and good in the beginning of the year and produced a lot of uniform native cover throughout. So that will be ongoing. And then plans for the future include, we got 1 more year into June 2025, the maintenance contract goes to. So during that time, I'll be drafting a maintenance plan and budgeting and funding for long-term maintenance. We're talking like 10 years on this site. But as many of you know, it takes years to feel out a site after initial restoration. So a lot of it's just seeing how the site responds and monitoring that. And that will kind of guide our maintenance plan moving forward. Key piece of that maintenance, fire, rolling prescribed burns through. And we'll get one through eventually here, hopefully this spring. But the work has just begun after the initial restoration. And here I posted the wild and rare action plan. They had kind of the same actions included in what it takes to maintain an oak savanna. So quickly, lessons learned here. Oh, one thing I did want to mention on the maintenance side of things, I forgot the differing ages of oak trees. So we had old growth, gigantic oaks on site, burrs dominant, some white throughout. Because of the suppression, lack of fire, we're not seeing much differing age classes of these oaks. So now with the clearing of the buckthorn, we're getting a ton of seedlings popping up here. So I might have to look into supplementing different age classes of the oaks just to supplement that so that the oak regeneration could be more stable. So yeah. Lessons learned here. I underestimated the tree clearing work by about $35,000. At the time, the wood chips produced, the plan was to bring to a nearby energy plant for them to use. At the time, they were so thick with material from all the ash tree that they were not receiving anymore. So I was left with having the chips hauled off site. So that was quite a bit of an additional cost. I could have used more planning to find less expensive alternatives would have been completed had there been more time. So there again, another lesson learned. So public concerns with tree removal, but not as much as anticipated. Probably could have given more time with the public signage. This is one of the signs we put out on site right here shown, very large on site. They were 4x4 out there. The park, like I said, the park is popular. It gets over 600,000 over 600,000 visitors a year. This is a busy location, signs and website. There was some public concern with tree removal. Tree removal is happening all over our park system in different locations too for different reasons. So improving education outreach on the fact that not all tree removal is a bad thing. Share more info with the public on the benefits of tree removal for further resource enhancement. And I can't stress enough to draft quality project specifications before starting a project. If you hire a contractor or complete the work internally, having clear specifications helps you and anyone else working on the project so much throughout the process. And the quick breakdown of the costs, tree removal, a little bit inflated because of the extra cost, site prep, site planning, site maintenance. Total cost was about 120. We're looking at about almost 11,000 per acre cost. And this initial cost was expensive. It was almost double the cost of like a woodland restoration per acre. But ongoing maintenance throughout an oak savanna landscape or a prairie landscape like this is going to be a lot less expensive than a woodland restoration maintenance ongoing long term, just because the mowing and more importantly prescribed burns can be rolled through more efficiently and effectively to control those invasives. So with that, why is this work important? We provide it provides high quality wildlife habitat, preserved and expands unique features. So despite being in an urban area, these species, especially species of greatest conservation needs still exist. Just showing this map here, you can see that here's the park that we're within, and we're looking at 21 to 50 species of greatest conservation need just in this township here from the last census of that. So that park lies in there. And these park spaces in the urban areas do make a difference and are integral in providing wildlife habitat, especially in the Mississippi Flyway. The proof is shown in wildlife survey work. So one example of that is in Long Lake Regional Park, a park northwest of Battle Creek. We have been restoring hundreds of acres of oak woodlands and adjacent prairies over the past decade. 6 years ago, a volunteer banding program was started at the park, and the data collected shows the enhanced habitat is being used by a large quantity and diversity of birds. And it's just great to see them using the habitat and that being provided to them as it should, especially in these urban areas. So there were 70 different species banded, 218 birds retrapped, mix of resident and non-resident. So they were going to the same exact spot over the past 5 years, which is crazy to think about. So thank you to those volunteer bird banders that did that program, and it's ongoing. Otherwise, that completes my presentation here. Just a shout out, if there's anyone out there that completes insect or bird surveys, please reach out. Always looking to complete research and survey work in the park system. I want to thank you for your time. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me. And thanks to Carly and the other people on the presentation panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Just a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and posted on our website for you to grab specific information as well as speaker contact info. And with that, I will hand it over to Matt for our second presentation today.
All right, everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. We're out here in kind of remote locations, so I'm going to have to apologize ahead of time if I go in and out. So let me go ahead and find my screen here. Okay. Okay, thanks for your presentation, Mike. Appreciate all that. And a lot of the things that we've been doing, that y'all have been doing, we have also been doing. And so similar lesson learned, I echo everything that Mike said. We're learning many of the same lessons. Oak savannas can be incredibly challenging. They're long-term, sort of a very long-term project. That's the thing I've learned with oak savannas. It's definitely not a 5-year project. It can be more like a 10 to 20-year project. So that would be my my entry comment to this is always expect long-term when you're working with savannas, unless they're very, very small. So I'm the habitat biologist for Minnesota Valley Trust. We exist alongside the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge and Wetland Management District. I'm stationed in Carver at our Rapids Lake Visitor Center, and I work pretty much on public lands, permanently protected public lands, and my job is entirely habitat restoration, management, and improvement. So today I'm going to talk about some of the oak savanna work that we've been doing at Minnesota Valley. These are projects that I've been working on. And I'm really excited to share this information and sort of help build this consortium of professionals to build knowledge and help us improve what we're doing on oak savannas. Because those of you who've been doing this long enough know that they can be incredibly frustrating sometimes. And they're like zebras. No oak savanna is exactly the same. So just a brief background about Minnesota Valley. We have two components. So our National Wildlife Refuge occurs within the Minnesota River Valley. Along a 70-mile stretch of the Minnesota River. We own over 14,000 acres, most of which is floodplain forest. A small portion of that is going to be native prairie and oak savanna, which are our two highest habitat priorities, followed by wetlands. That would be more of palustrine wetlands, so your potholes. Our wetland management district occurs within the surrounding 14 counties. And that started in about 1988. The refuge started in 1976. Our wetland management district contains all of our waterfowl production areas. There's a much larger area for expansion compared to the refuge. You can see on the image, the map to the left, we have a very small expansion area. It's largely confined to the Minnesota River bluffs just outside of those. The wetland district manages over 10,000 acres, most of which is prairies and wetlands. We have a couple of savannas. The vast majority of our oak savannas that we manage occur within our National Wildlife Refuge. As you can see on the ecological province map, Minnesota Valley occurs in 3 of those ecological provinces, and we have a host of different ecological zones within those. Because of the location that we're at, we have this transition zone where we're going from tall grass prairies to deciduous forests, and lots of lake country, lots of deciduous forests, but also a lot of prairies. So because of that, we have a lot of oak savannas. This was one of my favorite old paintings of the Minnesota River Valley. And you can see on the area that I outlined in red, that's where our oak savannas occur. Most of the oak savannas that we own and manage are in those river bluffs. So they're going to be heavily forested for the most part. Most of the prairie is gone on a lot of these. They've either been converted to pasture grasses, turf grasses, they're mowed regularly, or they've just straight up forested over. And most of our FWS owned savannas occur right there on the Minnesota River bluffs. So they're dry, sandy, lots of topography, lots of short grass prairie, beautiful oak savannas, beautiful prairies when they're in that remnant condition. Lots of big, beautiful, gnarly bur oaks. We've just been doing a study here with one of our former bio apprentices. She's a grad student at UMN, and currently, I think the oldest oak we have right now goes back to 1815. So these oaks have seen a lot of history. They've seen a lot of different changes. And I'm just sitting here thinking about Aldo Leopold in that chapter where he's cutting through that oak and talking about all the different stages of history. I'm just like, if these oaks could talk, they could tell us quite a story. We really began serious savanna restoration around 2018 up at our Rapids Lake unit up here in Carver. And most of our oak savannas that we manage are in that Rapids Lake area. We have over, I'd say, 150 acres of savanna just here at Rapids Lake, and a constant management effort, and we're doing pretty well. But since 2018, we've since had a couple of acquisitions that contain some larger savannas that have been my responsibility over the past 4 years. I came on board in February of 2020, and it's been quite a learning experience. So with our oak savannas, we are, when we're looking at restoration sites, we're using the exact same things that Mike talked about. We're using our aerials, we're using existing remnants when we're looking at an acreage for acquisition. For those of you who don't know, the trust is the land building entity that exists with the refuge. So Refuge doesn't really acquire land anymore. We are the primary entity that acquires land for the refuge. We restore the habitat, and then we transfer it over to the service for permanent protection. We use a variety of different funding sources, including clean water amendment, LASARD funds, and CPL grant. CPL is our bread and butter. We also have a heavy reliance on the Fish and Wildlife Service Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, and it's an absolute wonderful partner for us. Dedicates a lot of good funding to help us with things, both before, during, and after restoration, until that land transfers over to the service. We also use our Conservation Corps crew, which is funded by a CPL grant, and we rely on other partners such as Pheasants Forever, Minnesota Pheasants, Ducks Unlimited, for other sorts of projects. For our oak savannas, it's primarily through the CPL grant program and the Partners for Fish and Wildlife. So some other things that we're using with our oak savannas, we're looking for those big open grown bur oaks. And when we're considering these kinds of sites, we're looking for not necessarily big open grown oaks, because as most of you probably know, bur oaks kind of throw the curve because they could be really small and still be really old. They're a lot more kind of like our bristlecone pines out west, which can be really small but really old and super tight rings. So we're looking for those open grown bur oaks to tell us that there wasn't much else growing underneath these. And then we're also looking at the size, the abundance, species diversity, and age classes of these deciduous trees. I grew up in North Carolina. My dad was a Forest Service biologist and taught me a lot about using the age classes and abundance of trees to help you figure out what's the story of the land. And for most of these, it's, trees anywhere from 3 to maybe 12-inch diameter. They're not super big. We've gotten some bigger ones, especially our ashes and lindens and some of those hackberries and other species that grow faster. But it's pretty much even across the board. We're looking at typical mesophytic species: ironwood, hackberry, basswood, green ash, box elder, sugar maple, silver maple, cottonwood, aspen, and for us, the big enemy here is buckthorn, which I'll talk about in just a minute. We're also using topography. Like I said, these oak savannas occur on steep areas. So we have to base a lot of this on not just where we think that oak savanna boundary is, where it starts going more into eastern deciduous forest, but also what can we open up, because we're removing all the canopy at once. And we have a short time frame to do this, or it's what our contractors like to do, and we want to get all that canopy out at once. So before we take all that out, we got to consider, are we going to have erosion? Because when we have heavy, especially large eastern red cedars that are thick and dense, lots of high numbers of them, that is usually kind of a big no-no, because there's not going to be much else under them. We're also looking at topography and as a feasibility measure for prescribed burning, which is our primary management tool on these oak savannas after we've restored them. So whenever we're doing these things, we're thinking 5, 10, 20 years ahead to say, hey, can we actually manage this after we've taken all this out? Do we have a bunch of garlic mustard under some of these oak trees? One project I'm going to talk about briefly, we had to sacrifice some really nice looking bur oaks because I learned from some hard experience on a previous project that you open up garlic mustard, it becomes a really big problem, and you're working on it for years and years and years. I hate dealing with it, and I'd rather not deal with that again. So sometimes we just got to let these bur oaks, especially if they're already at the top of that canopy, they're dominating the top of that canopy. Let those old guys keep doing what they're doing. They fall over, make openings, and maybe there'll be some more oaks in there. But for us, accessibility, feasibility for management, and also public access. We're an urban refuge. We want to help people connect with that resource. So if they can't get in there, then they can't connect with that resource. So the only people that know it's there is us. And while that's important, it doesn't really help achieve our mission from the public standpoint. Our objectives are the same as all of yours might be. We're trying to release those bur oaks, and we tend to just kind of go from there. And we're trying to stop that degradation process, keep deforestation off. That's the hardest part, dealing with those legacy effects of that forest ecosystem. Many of our oak savannas started reforesting around the mid 1900s, so the 1950s and 60s, when folks started abandoning livestock operations. They started doing more row cropping, got better machinery, have more emphasis on farm, fence row to fence row, and so they just abandoned a lot of these oak savannas, and of course didn't have fire in them. We're also trying to release those existing remnant prairies because we have just a few of them here and there, really nice ones at times, and we're trying to foster that spread either through passive management, that's without seeding and just using fire, maybe some mowing and cutting, or we will actually direct seed stuff. That's becoming a more common practice on oak savannas I do, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. So let's dig into these project examples. I only have a few minutes here. So the first one is the Lundquist tract. This was my one of my very first projects I came into, maybe my first week of work. And that's kind of a tongue twister, week of work week. Anyway, so we started working on this project in February 2020. You can see here in the 1940 imagery, this was clearly an open prairie with some nice, beautiful bur oaks. And just so you know, most, if not all, those bur oaks are still there. We have one bur oak on the acreage just to the east of that first polygon, between those two polygons, near the old building site that is so old it doesn't even produce acorns anymore. It's probably like in the 60-inch DBH range. It's huge. It's a huge bur oak. Fast forward to 2019, and the story is very different. Very, very different. Now, Mike had mentioned something in his presentation about laying down mats. That's a really good idea. And I'm going to ask some folks about that later on after I'm going to talk to you about that after the presentation. I'd like to learn more about that. Something that we did on this project and another project beforehand in anticipation of that restoration, because we knew we were going to be acquiring the crop fields to the south as an addition to the refuge. We planted, my predecessor and our private lands biologist planted a buffer of native wild rye and annual rye to create an access and turnaround area for that machinery in anticipation of that savanna project. And it's performed wonderfully. Prevented a lot of erosion problems. It gets gumbo mud in the springtime. You know, it's wintertime. They got to have traction. And it gave something for the farmer to farm for a couple of years there right before we started restoration. That buffer is still there, and it melds seamlessly into the rest of the seeded prairie. You can see here that there's very little of that original prairie left, very, very little. And now in 2023, it's completely opened up. This is 15 acres, huge savanna, huge savanna. So kind of a take home we had from this project before I start talking about the work we've done. Before you open up a savanna this large, think about your objectives and be extremely realistic, both from your own expectations and what you can expect from your contractors. Be very specific. Talk to your contractors and know what their equipment is. Give them some leeway to use equipment. However, we found that high volume ATV sprayers in these kinds of situations on these large savannas with steep slopes is not super effective. Why? Because they miss more. And for us, it's just more stuff that we have to go in with our limited resources and keep cutting. We started tree removal in February 20, and then we finished in 21. We do all of our oak savanna work in winter. Like I said, sandy, dry soils, highly erosive. We also have recent regulatory changes for the rusty patch bumblebee. So this is pretty much the only time of year we can do this stuff. We do, again, what most of you probably do. We get the trees out and we spray them in fall. Like I said, we're still fighting garlic mustard. The woody species are doing a little bit better. Our primary targets are the buckthorn, honeysuckle, and non-native stuff. We also focus on prickly ash, sumac, a few of those other natives, but those early succession, fast-growing species, the box elder, hackberry, even the aspens, stuff that takes up a lot of space really fast. We're trying to kill all those. We do have state-listed kittentails on this oak savanna, and I'm very happy to say that our contractors have done a really good job avoiding mortality of those plants, and any hits that we got, they came back really well. This project, we also seeded some native grasses in March of 2021, right after tree removal was finished, the vast majority of tree removal. And I'll talk about that here right before I finish. I just have a couple minutes. And it was exceptionally successful. That's what I want to say first. It was very successful, and it's something we plan to keep doing. Something else we started doing on this savanna and a couple of others, we started thinking, hey, we're foliar spraying the buckthorn in the fall. What are we doing about the ones that we missed that are putting out berries? So we've been cutting this stuff every summer, right when ideally when they're fully leafed out, but we usually end up hitting them when the berries are green. So what that means is we're hitting this stuff hopefully before the berries are viable. I'm gonna, oh, hold on. I gotta finish my screen share here, just a minute. So I want to fast forward to the native grass portion because I feel this is incredibly relevant, and I'll make this extremely brief. We're always very careful about these seedings. We do it primarily for fuel loading, erosion control, control woody species, and speed up that re-veg process. All of these are examples where we've used these native grasses. Most of this was bare cover. If you're going to do this, the best time to do it is over the snow the first winter after you've done that tree removal. There's no magic seeding rate. If you have questions, give me a call. We're always experimenting with different seeding rates. The best rates that we found are over 80 seeds per square foot. It's labor intensive. It doesn't cost a ton. You do need to use a seed carrier. I'm happy to share those mixes with people. We've been incorporating information from our wetland projects, but also from UMN's growing research with the Cover It Up program. We also use some info from M&L's mixes. And the one thing I can say is that if you're going to do something to control these woodies and build fuel, Canada, Virginia wild rye, and slender wheatgrass are your go-to species. We've also found a lot of success with silky wild rye. These are a couple of examples of what we've been doing. And this is absolutely phenomenal. This was all bare, just so you know, all bare. And fall seedings, not great. Snow seedings, they do a lot better, especially with fresher seed. Here's an example of just some of that short growth. You can see the litter that we had on the ground. And this is what it looked on the image to the right. This is what it looked like this fall. That's really tall fuel, but that's woody control, and that is super, super awesome cover. It's going to die back over time, especially if we start burning it. Another species we've started experimenting with is Quitguard, which is an annual triticale hybrid. Absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. You got to seed it much higher than the companies suggest. Does great over snow, doesn't produce a lot of leaf foliage on the bottom, does not seem to compete with natives. That's what it's hailed for. It's used in fire rehab. Absolutely wonderful species to use. Here's an example. This was all bare cover. varying ground cover, absolutely great species to use. With that, I'm done with my comments. I appreciate everybody's time, and I look forward to hearing everybody's questions.
Great. Thank you both for those presentations. Really appreciate it. We have a ton of questions, so we'll dig right in. I want to start kind of first with questions that kind of go back to site preparation and particularly like the tree removal aspect of it. So one of the questions was, why do you not burn the trees on site? And that maybe I'll throw to Mike because it appeared that you were hauling the trees off site.
Yeah, well, yeah, I saw a lot of questions about the trees and the stump, so maybe I'll just try to address all of that. So in terms of that implement that M&L used, it also helped that the fellow buncher, when it came in, actually was able to cut either really flush or slightly below the ground level. So there wasn't any stumps for the implement to run into, and it did scrape the surface of them and grind that up. As for burning the material on site, as you saw from the photos, there was so much material. There was a number of factors why we didn't do that. I mean, we're buttoned up right up against a residential area. The burn scars, we would have had very large burn scars all over I mean, the site wasn't huge. It was only 11-acre site. So that was a concern. Sterilizing the soil with those burn scars, even under frozen conditions. So those were just some of the reasons why.
Matt, do you want to come back in and comment on that? How were you handling the woody material on your sites?
We do the same thing. So we ideally like to chip and haul that off, but because of the kind of sites we work with, we are rarely ever able to do it. And just the nuances of most of the time, what'll happen is if you hire someone, you know, like PRI, M&L, and RP, they're not going to have as much of that capability to chip that. They're going to have to hire a sub. And we've had trouble in the past with subcontractors. Tree removal companies are incredibly busy, and they just can't always get them out the time that you want. So we've been piling and burning. And we have one project site where we had to choose our burn pile sites very carefully in places where we got a lot of exotic grass cover, places we didn't really mind sterilizing. And because of we have to follow NWCG regulations, so they have to be a little more careful how they burn them. And what we found actually is if you spread that ash out, we spreaded that custom native grass mix in there, and it's actually growing. So if you are going to use burn piles, put them in a field next door that you're getting ready to seed to a prairie, or if it is an existing prairie, be ready to disc that and spread that ash out and then reseed it. But yeah, either of those options is good. I don't ever recommend having people just take the whole trees out, and that's incredibly expensive.
Great, thank you. Kind of keeping with the theme a little bit with the forestry tiller, Mike, doesn't it destroy any potential existing seed bank? And then that kind of leads into, you know, how do you assess whether or not, and this, I'll throw that to both of you, whether there is potentially a viable native seed bank and versus, you know, a weed seed bank? Mike, you want to take a first stab?
Sure. Just given the site assessment we did over the few years prior to making the decision on restoring this site, it was determined there was little to no. I mean, they always hide, and native seed can be good at being dormant and pop up even at years not showing after this site. But given what we were working with and what we were seeing for the soil just being bare and it was just so degraded, we just determined that we were just going to move forward with the process I described, and then introducing the seed mix that we did. I don't know if the tiller necessarily would destroy seeds like that. It's a shallow tilling process, and M&L can answer these questions about it better than I. They use it they've used it in a number of different locations, but just you got to weigh those factors, you know, and the to remove that many trees and see how that degraded site would respond. um, uh, just introducing the native seed just outweighed that. So you just got to prioritize and take all the factors into consideration. So that's why we went that route.
Okay, thank you. Matt, do you think you have any higher expectation of a native seed bank out in the areas you're working?
Yeah, so for us, we have actually about 20 plus years of veg surveys in another savanna, and the native prairie is very slowly coming back. So it I very much agree with Mike. So most of these oak savannas, when we're working with them, they're in a heavily degraded condition. So unless you have a lot of remnant vegetation and you've done your due diligence, making sure that you've got you're looking at those species before you've started tree removal, looking for little places where you've got cytos, big blue, those kinds of species that are already there. Always remember first, when you open up all that niche space, what's going to fill it? What's already there? It's usually going to be weeds, short-lived perennials. It's going to go through that forestation process. You're going to have those legacy forest effects. And for us, that's why we do a lot of seeding work. So I like the idea of that forestry tiller, because in a site where you're not as concerned about that remnant community, you're just trying to keep those oaks open. You can recreate that savanna community. It just depends on what you're comfortable with, whether you want to try and let that come in and risk using additional resources over a longer time, or if you want that quicker return by seeding stuff directly and you're not as worried about the seed bank.
Thanks. And I'm gonna follow up with you. Can you kind of discuss drilling versus broadcasting versus hand seeding, which it sounds like you did, and then throw on there, I'm interested in, the question came up about whether or not you would interseed. So you were talking about using a grass heavy mix. At what point would you potentially introduce some of the forbs, and how do you approach that?
Yeah, so the question here was seeding method, differences in seeding methods, and when to add different kinds of species. For my approach right now is we're just going to assume that if there are forbs in there, we're going to try and let them express themselves, but they can't express themselves if there are a bunch of other broadleaf and woody weeds shading them out. And so if we do have plans to do forbs, hopefully in the future, because we've got potential funds to do it. Uh, we don't want to hold on to it for too long because your seed viability does go down. So we want to buy that seed fresh. We are going to take our time. The grasses are a temp measure just to hold that ground, build some cover. We can get fire in there, and then we can start looking at what the community looks like. Broadcasting by hand is only effective if you have the time and the people to do it. If you have the topography, if the topography isn't going to allow machinery, like say a Vicon is going to be um, a lot more adaptable than like a native grass drill, unless you have like a Great Plains that has independent control over your different flutes. Maybe even like a Brilliant seeder that's still just a flat seeder. You're going to have topo problems, but if you're going to drill seed, use a lower rate. If you're going to broadcast, use at least 50% higher rate. If you're going to snow seed it, again, use a 50% higher rate. I always like to go really high, but what we are learning is there is a point of being too high. But we're just experimenting with this for the first time, and it could take 5 years before we really see the wild rice start thinning out. But for us, it looks really good. But yeah, we're going to add forbs after we've got more control over those woody species, because we are still putting triclopyr out there, and we don't want to undo that work because the forbs are going to cost a lot more.
Great, thanks. Mike, can you provide your thoughts on that? And then because you did put forbs in, would you put additional forbs in as an interseeding? And then I also want to throw in Matt's comment about your seeding technique where you use the mat to cover it too, his burning question there about that.
Yeah, so my thoughts on drill seeding versus broadcast, hand cast. It's all site dependent, but if the site allows, I always spec it out to be drill seeded, just because from my experience, the seed to soil contact is just gives it that much more of a chance to grow. So drill seeding is always something I like to spec out. Again, if the site allows it. And I appreciate what Matt's saying about the rye and getting some grasses established there. Again, it depends on the site, but when sometimes you get these sites so degraded, and you're trying to outcompete the invasives, you need to get those quick growing species on the ground, and then potentially worry about the forbs later. I've read articles even where people go in to get those grasses established and end up going throughout the area and actually using Roundup or glyphosate to kill some of those native grasses just to have some areas where the forbs can be interseeded. But the point there being just getting something other than invasives growing on the ground, something that you can roll fire through also. So, and I might have misled you guys on the whole mat thing when I had mentioned mats. I was talking about for the vehicles to drive through and drive on the site and not to cause erosion and issues. Is that what you were curious about, Matt, or did you think I was referring to something else?
No, I'd just like to see some photos and just learn more from you guys and from M&L about that method, because some of these projects we're always looking for ways to control erosion. And like I said,
Oh,
we
sure.
essentially can't do savanna work outside the winter pretty much,
Yeah.
too much regulatory stuff that we got to deal
Right,
with. So.
right. And this was actually part of the tree contractors method. They had large thick mats that erosion mats basically are mats for the equipment to drive on. Just low impact to provide low impact on the entrance and exit of the area. So
Great, thank you. So it was me who misunderstood that. I'm going to throw in a couple questions about age stratification of trees. So how, when you've taken out, all the understory-ish kind of stuff, and now you've put in your native seed mix, whether it's grasses or a mix of grasses and forbs, you're managing that one way or the other with fire, with herbicides. How do you get age stratification in? Mike, you kind of talked about that. And then how do you manage it after the fact when you try to start that process?
yeah, I'm still kind of learning about that myself, and during this next into the next maintenance phase when we're tying up in June 2025, I hope to learn a little bit more about it this winter. But my initial thoughts here are to introducing different different trees onto a site that has native trees on it, and established native trees is always kind of can be a fickle thing. So I'm going to learn more about it, but in other areas we've introduced seedlings from Minnesota DNR stock. That's where we get them. We've also looked into and are starting a program collecting acorns from these sites that we're doing restoration work on, and working with nurseries to plant those to grow, to see if we can't grow our own seedlings. But in terms of closing that gap between seedlings and these hundreds of old growth oaks, I'm going to look into further what it would take to put in some larger caliber oak trees, specifically bur oak trees throughout. Ones that may be 5-10 years older, container trees, and how that might affect the site and what that might provide or benefit or be not a good idea. I don't really know at this time, but I'm going to look into it.
Matt, do you have any comments about how you would either maintain or add age stratification
Wow.
and managing that?
For us, we would just identify those younger generations, fence them off, and try to make sure that we're being careful with fire and we're not hitting them with herbicide, and just allowing that age structure to develop itself. Just protect, protect, be careful with fire, especially with fire. That's your most potentially damaging management tool, but it's also potentially your most helpful if you use it properly.
Great. Can you give me a sense of an interval? We have 1 minute left, an interval that you would run fire over, both of you, maybe really quick?
If you run fire through an oak savanna, especially if you got pin oaks at a frequency of you wait more than 3 to 5 years, you're gonna have a ton of pin oaks. It's a problem we have. So burning in fall, either every year or every 3 years, is an ideal situation.
Great.
You're gonna avoid hammering those bur oaks when they're leafing out, which could hurt them, make them more susceptible to oak wilt and bur oak blight. Fall burns best, and there are people who do it every fall. I don't think that's a good idea, but every 2 to 3 years is a good idea.
Okay, and at that, I have to cut us off. I just want to thank you both again for your presentations and thank the audience for A, attending, and B, submitting so many great questions. There are a lot of questions left, so if some of you have questions, you might want to reach out directly to Mike and Matt and have your burning questions answered. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.